Dad, I have some good news for you.
My sister Ella came rushing into the living room. I braced myself for whatever brilliant idea she came up with this time. Our parents looked up immediately, all their attention on her.
I've been saving a lot from the jobs I've been doing over the weekends. I now want to start my own online business selling jewelry. You guys have inspired me since your store is so successful.
She opened up her laptop and showed us her new website.
See, it's all ready. Now all I need is to add the items I'll be selling.
My parents exchanged a look I saw often. It was a look of pride and joy at their brilliant daughter. Then Dad turned to me.
Aren't you going to congratulate your sister?
Whatever. I rolled my eyes.
Take that attitude and go to your room.
I got up to leave, but Ella blocked my path.
It's okay, Dad. Don't be too hard on Kat. She'll catch up one day. In fact, she managed to get a C in her latest math test. That's so much better than a D she got in the previous test. Isn't that great?
She slowly clapped in my face and laughed. It was humiliating. I lunged at her, tackled her to the floor, and started to pull her hair.
Kat, you're hurting me.
Mom grabbed me and pulled me off Ella.
Get away from her, you crazy child.
I stood up and ran to my room. I shouldn't have let her get to me. Now my parents had another reason to hate me. Yep, it was just another normal Saturday evening in my house. Our parents were constantly comparing me to Ella, who, according to Mom, was her perfect and most talented daughter. If only Mom knew how wrong she was. You see, my big sister had perfected the art of fooling our parents into thinking she was an angel. She flourished in her studies and also helped our parents at their jewelry store. It also didn't hurt that she was strikingly beautiful and a social butterfly. Everyone wanted her in their circle, and all the boys wanted to go out with her. Truth was, Ella was evil, manipulative, and very cunning, and I was the only one who saw right through her mask. Watch till the end to see how Ella's lies caught up with her, and the truth about who she really was came out. Also like this video and subscribe to this channel to watch more cool videos like this one. By the end of that month, Ella's online business was up and running. I always saw her deliver wrapped items to some of her friends at school. One evening, our dinner conversation took a very interesting turn.
So, Ella, how's business?
It's going great, Dad. I'm sorry I haven't had much time to help out at the store. I've been busy making deliveries. Don't worry about it, honey. Speaking of the store, something happened there last night.
If I wasn't mistaken, I saw Ella tense.
A few things are missing from the storage room. I think we got robbed.
What? That's horrible.
Yeah, the police are investigating.
Don't you have cameras at the store?
We do, but the thieves were both wearing masks.
So you don't have any suspects?
Not yet, but the police are questioning Thomas, the security guard.
Ella, who seemed bored with the whole conversation, suddenly choked on her food and began to cough repeatedly.
Are you all right, honey? I can't.
She stood and ran out of the room.
What was that all about?
I have no idea, but I was going to find out. I kept a close eye on Ella and nothing interesting happened at first, but one night, I heard her open her bedroom window. I rushed to my window and I saw her jump and fall on some bushes below. This was it. I was finally going to find out what she was up to. I quickly put on a jacket and jumped out my window, just like Ella. We'd both done it so many times and never once got hurt or caught. Ella ran down the street and I ran after her, trying my best not to be seen. A few minutes later, I saw a car's headlights flash twice, and Ella rushing towards it. The car door opened and a man got out. I knew that man.
Thomas, hey, where is it?
I could lose my job and go to jail over this.
Calm down, they don't suspect anything. Now hand me the package. I need to get back before my annoying sister finds out I'm gone.
All right. But this is the last time I'm helping you steal from your parents.
I could not believe what I was hearing.
As if you could turn down the money I'm paying you. Now leave.
As Thomas got back in his car, I ran up the street and climbed through my window. I barely slept that night. I was bursting with excitement. I was going to share my findings with Mom and Dad first thing in the morning. Breakfast was going to be very entertaining for me and shocking for Ella. However, the next morning, I woke up to find both Mom and Dad gone and Ella eating breakfast by herself. Hey, where's Mom and Dad?
They already left for the store.
But they always have breakfast with us.
They had to go earlier than usual. Did you have something you wanted to tell them?
Not really. Excuse me. I picked up my bag and went to school. I thought about going to the store instead of school, but Mom and Dad would be so mad at me for skipping school. I decided to wait until dinner. Immediately after school, I ran home. It was finally time to expose Ella. As soon as I walked through the door, I started talking. Mom, Dad, you'll not believe what Ella...
Kat, explain to us what these pieces of jewelry were doing in your room.
I stared in shock. On the table in front of our parents and Ella were several jewelry boxes. What are you talking about?
Ella found them in your room and she showed us right away. Did you steal this from the store?
What? I didn't steal anything. Ella must have put them there.
Enough. Your sister's a good girl. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't know what you've been doing.
I found the boxes under your bed, Kat. Did a ghost walk in and hide them there?
Stop lying! I furiously wiped tears from my eyes and ran to my room.
This is not over. You're in so much trouble, young lady.
Ella must have planted those boxes in my room. How was I going to convince Mom and Dad that she was setting me up? The next morning, Mom informed me that they decided not to report me to the police. She proceeded to issue me with a stern warning to not steal from the store again. She also grounded me for a month. Once again, I tried to tell her the truth about Ella, but she didn't let me talk. The more I tried to explain, the angrier she got, so I just stopped. Meanwhile, Ella walked around and laughed with her friends as if nothing had happened while I was miserable and angry. I needed to do something.
I opened my locker and dumped my books inside. Ugh, I hated school. Only thing I loved about it were my fabulous friends who adored me. And how could they not? I sold them fancy jewelry at half the price my parents were selling them at the store. I was about to close my locker when something caught my eye. It was a note taped to the inside of the locker door. I know you're the thief. I want you to steal the diamond and gold necklace from the store display window. I'll pick it up from your locker tomorrow after school. Do what I ask or I'll report you. I stared at the piece of paper in shock. Could someone have seen me take stuff from the store? The diamond and gold necklace was the most expensive item in the store. My parents would never forgive me if I got caught stealing it. But what choice did I have? Whoever left the note was going to expose me. After school, I went to see Thomas, the store security guard and also my accomplice. Thomas had worked at the store for years and my parents trusted him.
Ella, what are you doing here during the day? Someone could see you.
I'm in trouble. I told him about the note and the demand the anonymous sender had made.
Have you lost your mind? There's no way I'm helping you steal a $1,000 necklace.
You don't have a choice here. If I go down, so do you.
But we could go to jail.
Not if we steal the necklace and hand it over to whoever wrote the note. We have to do it tonight. It took a little more convincing, but Thomas finally agreed with me. I went home and waited for everyone to sleep. Then I snuck out. As usual, I had my parents' keys to the store with me. Thomas was already at the storefront. We put on our masks and opened the door. We grabbed the necklace and were out in minutes. We ran all the way to Thomas's apartment, which was only a few blocks away.
Now what?
Now I show the video to Mom and Dad. I couldn't believe Ella had fallen for my trap. When I wrote her the note, I thought she'd suspect it was from me, but she didn't. And now here she was, the necklace in her hand and a stunned look on her face.
Kat, what are you doing?
I followed you. I recorded everything. Mom and Dad will be so mad at you.
Give me that phone!
Thomas lunged at me, but I jumped out of the way. He fell down, and while he scrambled to get up, I ran out the door. When I got to our front door, I realized I didn't have my keys since I'd snuck out through the window. I rang the doorbell over and over. Mom! Dad! I could barely breathe from all the running. A few minutes later, the door opened.
Kat, what are you doing outside at this hour?
I have to show you something.
Dad, I can explain.
I turned to see Ella standing behind me, arms crossed and her head bent in defeat.
Girls, what's going on?
As soon as we were all inside the house, I showed everyone the video I'd recorded. When Mom saw Ella and Thomas take off their masks, she exclaimed in shock.
Oh my God, Ella? You're the one who's been robbing us? I'm so sorry. I never thought you'd find out.
Panic was written all over Ella's face.
Where's the necklace?
She took it out of her pocket and placed it on the table. Then she ran up the stairs and locked herself in her room. Mom dropped to her knees and started to cry.
How could she do this? She's so perfect.
Ella was never perfect, Mom. She just wanted you to think she was and you all fell for it. Police officers showed up at our house the next morning. When Ella saw them, she grabbed Mom's arm.
You called the cops on me? We didn't. But after Thomas was arrested last night, he told the police about you. But I don't want to go to jail.
Tears rolled down her face. I kind of felt sorry for her, but what did she expect? Ella, I'm sorry.
Don't talk to me. I hate you.
She was escorted out to a waiting police car. Dad went with her. What will happen to her?
Your dad and I have agreed not to make any charges, but she needs to go make a statement.
What?
Kat, I know you have your differences, but do you really want to see Ella go to jail?
I thought about it for a moment. I hated to admit it, but Mom was right. Okay, maybe not jail, but you can't just let her get away with it.
Of course not. We are sending her to live and work at Grandma Patty's farm.
I burst out laughing. Ella hated that farm. Not only was the farm hundreds of miles away, it was in a remote area that had no cell phone network. Also, Grandma Patty had no TV. Everyone there spent their days shoveling horse manure and cleaning chicken houses. For how long?
For the next 2 years. She will only leave the farm when she goes to college.
I walked to my room, happy that Ella's true nature had finally been exposed.
I grabbed my 5-year-old sister's hand and made a run for it. If we got caught, it'd all be over. We couldn't get sent over the border. We just couldn't. The sound of the dogs barking and the voices and the police officers grew louder with every second. We darted through the crowd until we came to a large drain. I jumped in first, then grabbed my sister and ran. The stench of the drain was nauseating, but we couldn't stop. We ran until everything was quiet in the dark. I sat and held Benita on top of me. When Mom had died, I'd promised her I'd take care of Benita. At this moment, I knew I needed to come up with a plan to protect my sister. This is my true story. However, names have been changed to protect the people involved.
Dev, I'm hungry.
Benny looked up at me. Don't worry, Benny, I'll get us something to eat. We walked along a dirty path. I saw lights ahead and I prayed that they were friends and not foes. A few minutes later, Benny and I stumbled into a refugee village. There were tents and boarded structures close to each other. I asked around for some food, but no one was willing to offer anything until I came to Arjuna and Anya's boarded structure. Anya opened the door and welcomed us into their 2-room home. She quickly made us some sandwiches with something to drink. After we thanked her, Benny and I gobbled them down. We had gone 2 days without eating. Thank you so much. My name is Dev and this is my sister, Benita. We're new here.
My name is Anya.
The door opened and she turned to the person that just came in.
And that's my older brother, Arjuna.
I stood up and shook Arjuna's hand. So what do you guys do for jobs?
There is a company that trains young men to be assistants to billionaires. It's nothing glamorous. We get less than minimum wage, but the income is steady.
How soon can I start training?
You can start tomorrow.
I'd need to get someone to watch Benny.
I'd love to watch her.
Anya offered.
You guys can stay here until you get on your feet. We don't have much, but someone helped us when we first started, so we're paying it forward.
The next day, I cleaned myself up and borrowed a suit from Arjuna. Training lasted 6 weeks where we learned how to answer phone calls, write shorthand, use a computer, practice basic sanitation methods, just to name a few. During those 6 weeks, I wasn't paid, so Benny and I depended on Arjuna's small salary to get by. I did some petty theft and handed the money to Anya to purchase food items. She never questioned where I got the money, and for that I'm grateful because I didn't want to lie to her. After my 6-week training, I was assigned my first billionaire. Over the years, I worked for quite a few billionaires, but they were all the same: mean, ungrateful, and selfish. I was able to put up a wooden structure next to Anya and Arjuna for Benny and I where we lived a very simple life. That was until I met Mr. Cook, who changed everything. During my first few weeks of working for Mr. Cook, who had a wife and 2 teenage daughters, it was a nightmare. I was expected to get to his home at 5 a.m., where I was instructed to iron Mr. Cook's suits and shine his shoes. I was also given domestic chores to complete as well. You'd think that if we were working in the same place, that Mr. Cook would have at least offered me a lift to the office, but that wasn't the case. I was expected to finish all my chores at his home and then travel to work and get there on time. But through it all, I smiled and I was always pleasant. If I had to suffer through a few injustices to give my sister a shot at a better life, then I was all for it. After the first 6 months, Mr. Cook called me to his office.
I must say, Dev, you are the best assistant I've ever had. You're diligent, hardworking, and not once have I heard you speak badly of me or my family.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
I was just testing you to see if I can trust you with the lifestyle that I live and some secrets that must be kept between a boss and his assistant. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
Good. I'll be setting up some computer courses and legal document classes so you're better equipped to fill in the gaps at the office when needed. You won't be getting a higher salary, but the experience will be good for you.
I kept my head down, did what I was told, and turned a blind eye to Mr. Cook's illegal affairs and late-night shenanigans with female workers. As the obedient assistant, I'd always call Mrs. Cook and let her know that her husband was in a meeting and he'd be home late. One afternoon, while Mr. Cook was out of the office, Mrs. Cook arrived. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cook. Mr. Cook is not in right now. Do you want to leave a message?"
What I want is to see my husband.
"You can wait in the waiting room until he comes, ma'am." Mrs. Cook laughed.
Do you really think I'm going to wait in the waiting room like a concubine?
Mrs. Cook walked to the door and tried to open it.
If you don't open this door right now, I'll make sure you never work in this town again, and you get deported to whatever godforsaken land you came from.
I opened the door quickly and Mrs. Cook entered and slammed the door behind her. I sat there nervously as I had strict instructions not to let anyone into Mr. Cook's office without his consent. As soon as I saw Mr. Cook walking towards his office, I walked hastily to greet him. "Mr. Cook, I'm so sorry, I couldn't stop her."
Boy, stop babbling. Spit it out. Couldn't stop who?
"Mrs. Cook, she's in your office, sir." Mr. Cook stopped and looked at me disapprovingly, but he didn't say anything.
Knock on the door in 5 minutes and say my next client is here.
I nodded and he inhaled deeply before he entered the office. For the next 5 minutes, I sat and listened to angry, muffled voices coming from inside Mr. Cook's office. As soon as the 5 minutes was up, I knocked on the door and opened it slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Cook, your next client is here."
Thank you, Dev. Margaret, we'll finish discussing this at home.
Mrs. Cook pushed past me and exited the office. Mr. Cook sat behind his desk and loosened his tie.
Pour me a scotch.
"Yes, sir." After pouring the drink, I handed it to Mr. Cook, who drank it in one shot.
Okay, bring in the fill-up files. We have to get...
Mr. Cook's eyes widened as he held his chest. "Mr. Cook, are you okay?" Mr. Cook couldn't answer as he gasped for words. "Somebody help!" A few staff members gathered into the office and laid Mr. Cook on the floor and started CPR. But it was too late. Mr. Cook was dead. Staff members waited outside Mr. Cook's office for the police to arrive. I was taken to the police station and questioned. That's when I saw Mrs. Cook as she sat by another table with an officer as she gave her statement. I wasn't released until midnight, and I arrived to collect Benita around 1 a.m. I'm sorry I got here so late.
It's okay, Dev. We saw the news. Leave Benita to sleep. She'll be okay.
Anya smiled. I looked over at Arjuna. What's going to happen now? I've never had a billionaire die on me before. I ran my hands through my hair frustratedly.
I'm sure the company will line up another job for you soon.
I sure hope so, for Benita's sake. Over the next few days, I waited for a phone call from the company, but none came. I wondered if Mrs. Cook made good on her promise to ensure that I'd never work in this town again. On the news, it was stated that Mr. Cook had died of a heart attack, so I was no longer a suspect in Mr. Cook's death. Even though this was the case, the company never called to assign me a new job. I returned to the streets and pickpocketed people to ensure I was able to take care of Benita. One afternoon, while out in the streets, I got a phone call from Mr. Cook's lawyer. He wanted me to be at Mr. Cook's reading of the will. Arjuna, do you think I should go?
If you're invited, it means he left you something. Either way, it won't hurt to go and see what's up.
On the day of the reading of the will, I walked into Mr. Hudson's office waiting area. Mrs. Cook and her 2 daughters were there. A few seconds later, Mr. Finland entered.
Thank you all for coming.
What is he doing here?
Mrs. Cook scoffed.
He's here because he was invited. Shall we go to my office and begin?
He has no right to be here. What could Stan possibly have left for this low-life assistant?
Mrs. Cook raved on and on that I was just the help and I needed to go home and attend to my own affairs. I stood up and turned to Mr. Finland. I think I'd better leave. I don't belong here.
Dev, you stay right there. I'll read the necessary parts to Mrs. Cook and her daughters, then I'll come and get you, okay?
I nodded and Mr. Finland ushered Mrs. Cook and her daughters into the office. Approximately 30 minutes later, Mrs. Cook rushed into the waiting area and began to accuse me of swindling her husband. I don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Cook stepped up and slapped me.
Security, get her and her daughters out of here now!
Yelled a voice from the door of the waiting area. After they were escorted from the building, Mr. Finland apologized to me. He also asked if I'd like to press charges against Mrs. Cook, but I told him I just wanted to get it over and done with, so he ushered me into his office. As I sat in the office and Mr. Finland read the will, tears came to my eyes. Mr. Cook had left me $10 billion. You're not joking, are you? Mr. Finland laughed.
Oh no, this is all legit. I guess you really made a mark on him. We also found documents where Mr. Cook was putting things into place so you'd have citizenship, and I'd like to finish the proceedings.
I nodded and gave Mr. Hudson all the information he needed so that I could receive the inheritance and the information needed to get citizenship. I have some friends. Can you help them with their citizenship as well?
Sure.
Mr. Hudson handed me his card.
Have them call me tomorrow so I can send all the paperwork in at the same time.
Over the next few weeks, Mr. Hudson helped us set up ID cards, bank accounts, birth papers, and citizenships. As soon as I received the inheritance, I gave Arjuna and Anya $1 billion. We purchased homes next to each other in suburban neighborhoods. We didn't want anything flashy to bring attention to ourselves. We were now able to enjoy our lives on our own terms. My story seemed to be a lucky one. Or was it? I have a confession to make. I was a computer hacker in my country. However, I knew I had to play possum if I wanted my plan to work. The goal was to get Mr. Cook to trust me, and once that goal was complete, I had everything else in the bag. Once trust was enabled, I had access to everything Mr. Cook had access to. Things such as his medication, legal documents, and of course, a computer. With his heart condition, it was easy to switch his medication to one that would induce a heart attack, and with his constant use of alcohol, it sped up the process. Next, I gained access to Mr. Cook's will and made adjustments where necessary. It was easy to get Mr. Cook to sign his will since he signed documents without reading, because, yup, he trusted me. I also left citizenship documents in Mr. Cook's office drawer. After all, what harm could a refugee boy do to a billionaire? Mr. Cook was just like the others. He had everything going for him, but he chose to be arrogant and selfish. I was able to fulfill my